Hey guys, welcome to this video about sensitivity and scenario table. And let me first of all, let me thank you for working extra hard on it. I know this is a little bit outside. This material is outside of what our class could permit, at least for me. I know other professors can do it on class, but I thought it would be best to do a video about it, so that it's going to be useful not only for your homework that you are going to do immediately after this, but also for your exam 2 and the final project. Now this can be a little bit daunting. This can look a little bit daunting when you first start, but with a few attempts, you'll see it is fairly straightforward and simple technique. So I won't be doing it and taking this extra time to go and do this video unless if I didn't think it was important. You're going to learn a few really cool features of Excel, and we'll learn how to use those features in doing financial modeling, how to in making your financial models really flexible and useful. So this is the technique that we're going to use today and do today are very useful, okay, and in practice as well as for your exams and things like that. Okay, so one thing I want to warn kind of all of you is don't assume once you watch this video, don't assume that you know it already. Say watch it, go back, and when you watch it, it'll be best if you follow along with me and try to do it, and also go back and try to do it yourself without looking. That is very important, and that was very important when you did the first midterm, and this will be important when you do the second midterm. Okay, so let's get started with that. Before we begin, let me show you kind of the final product, so you have in your mind what you are going to expect. Okay, so this is the very familiar model, right? So this is FCF DCF perpetuity model, where we figured out implied cost stock price. Okay, so what we are going to do now, and this came about because of all the forecasting stuff that we have done initially, right? So we started out with income statement, balance sheet, and so on. Income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows. We forecasted everything out, and eventually we made this free cash flow statement, and we figured out the implied stock price, which was so this is a different example, but which is $114.03, and this came because of very simplistic assumptions. As we know, all the forecasted variable, all the forecast drivers were the average of the past, and we know there were problems with that, right? So even if it was simple enough and did a pretty good job, we know averages of the past are not necessarily always the best predictors, and we want to look at other ways to do forecast and other reasonable ways that can happen to our company in the future, and we want to see how that is going to affect our valuation, right? So that is the goal. So now the final product is going to look something like that. So you can change your drivers. So these are historical values that are linked to income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement previously. So all of these are already linked. These are linked values. These are just historical averages. But your forecast variables are not the averages. As you can see here, if I double click on it, the forecast variables depend on what kind of scenario you're looking at. So for example, this is called a realistic scenario, and the realistic scenario is pretty much the average of the past and so on. If you change the scenario, so if you want to look at worst that can happen to this company. You'll click on worst case scenario and it'll show you in worst case scenario sales will grow slower, cost of goods sold will be higher, will be higher and keep increasing, and so on. Okay, SG&A within sales ratio will be higher than average, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the worst case scenario. And a best case scenario, everything will look nicer, sales will grow at a high rate and keep increasing, and so on. Okay, so and when you do, for example, best, realistic, and worst, everything will change for you. There is fourth option which makes it really flexible, called the sensitivity and scenario, where now you can specify. Remember, in best case and worst case, everything was best and everything was worst. In sensitivity and scenario, you can change each of these variables one at a time. You can say, all right, so sales growth, let me keep sales growth at the historical average. Okay, however, let my cost of goods sold be optimistic, because maybe I'll decrease the cost of goods sold ratio over time. Okay, so that's what we are kind of going to do, and this is what we want to see. And the final thing we want to see is how it's going to going to impact our implied stock price, and so on. Okay, and so you can present this is something you can present to your boss, this is something you can present to your client, so that they can go back and play with the assumption and see, for example, if you're analyzing a target, they can go back and see whether in best or worst of the situation, whether the target is still worth buying, the target company that you're looking at. Okay, all right, so where do we begin? So all this work is being done in the sheet you have already created, FCF DCF perpetuity table. We're just adding, see, this is the option exercise of value, and we're just doing everything right below this. But we have also created another sheet. For that, we have already created another sheet called, driver assumptions. In the driver assumptions, we are gonna list the conditions under which these guys will take different values. So the historical average, we're gonna put the assumptions down, all the assumptions that we had. Then we're gonna say, okay, if it is historical average, everything is going to be that. If it is analyst forecast, and we'll talk about what we are going to do with analyst forecast. Basically we are assuming, our forecast value is not going to be historical average, but what the financial analyst has been forecasting. Then we can come up with different kinds of scenario: optimistic, when things are going to go in our direction, in good direction, optimistic. Other one is realistic, another one is pessimistic, when things will go bad, and so on. Then we'll have measures of cost of capital too, right? So we have 6 different cost of capitals, as you know. So this is a little bit different, but in our model there's going to be 6 different cost of capital, and there is going to be something called steps. So steps is something else that makes the model more flexible. When we go back and say, for example, give me the optimistic approach and plus add 25% to it. That means the cost of goods sold, let me subtract 25% to it. It says cost of goods sold next year is going to be low, and it's going to continually decrease over time. So this is steps will be embedded over here. Okay, so lots of cool features, very flexible model, and once you get the hang of it, it's going to be kind of really easy to set up to, but you have to practice. Okay, practice is the key here. So that's why I wanted to do this video, so that you can go back and forth and watch a few times and do it yourself. Okay, doing is important here, practicing or doing. Okay, so let me exit out of this. All right, and let me get started on our thing. So this is our valuation model, McDonald's, Okay, as we know, we started about by 10% discount rate, and we are also going to work on this the main the place where we'll be putting the sensitivity and scenario table will be this DCF FCF perp sheet, and we are going to have our assumptions put down in the driver assumptions column, and you'll see what I mean by that. Okay, so in the driver assumptions column, let's start from here. All right, so in the driver assumptions column sheet, we're going to put down different scenario, right? So what it means is, okay, we can have the historical average, we can have we can use the historical average as our forecast variables, as our drivers, let's say. So let's say historical average. Then we can have analyst's forecast. Okay, let's say it's analyst forecast or industry average. Okay, so we have calculated some industry average and we're going to use it here. Industry averages, industry average or analyst forecast, depending on what we have. Then let's create another scenario called optimistic scenario, another scenario called realistic, you know, the one that is most likely to happen, another scenario called pessimistic scenario. Okay, and let me do this and go ahead and put like a row number. Okay, it's assumption number. So assumption number, this is assumption number 2. This I should have called it row number, and you'll see the point of this thing. All right, you'll see the point of doing that in a moment. So this is row number 7, row number 16, and let's go to all the way to row number 17 here. Let's call this assumptions. Okay, so our assumptions will be the assumptions related to the cost, the drivers of the financial statements, which is basically these assumptions. So we are gonna, so instead of historical average, we are gonna put all different kinds of possible values of these growths, these rates. All right, so assumption, I copy the assumption and go, I'm doing control page up and down, okay, to move across. So in the assumption, we'll start from sales growth, cost of goods sold, effective tax rate, that all of that belong to the income statement. In the balance sheet, we'll have another bunch of assumptions that we are going to copy here, and in the balance sheet we'll have one assumption, the assumption about the dividends. Okay, again, you have to realize this is one way of many different ways to do sensitivity and scenario, but the way we're going to learn can be used for different things. Okay, so learn this as a tool because it's going to be helpful no matter how you do this kind of analysis. Okay, as the last thing, let's put down free cash flow perpetuity growth rate. Okay, and you'll see this is another kind of assumptions that we are going to make. All right, so now we have to give it like the historical values of this thing. All right, and we can do that by just going over here. So historical sales growth, are going to be whatever they were in the past. So historical historical sales growth are going to be these guys, right? The average sales growth right here. So I can do it. I can copy this and go all the way down, all the way here, paste it here. I should have copied the inside formula. Oops, not the inside formula. Okay, let me do this. This is the better way. So average is just average sales growth of these guys. So average sales growth of these guys. I think it'll ignore the NA. Give me 0.05, and I just need one column here because historical average is going to the same number. And the income statement has all the way to effective tax rate of 34%. Okay, so that's good. For the other ones, for other averages, we need to go to the balance sheet. So go to equal average, go up to the balance sheet. All right, just pick this number and hit enter. So up to D&A to sales ratio, we are going to use the balance sheet as the average. Then I'm going to go back, and for the dividend ratio, I'm going to pull. I don't need to go this far. I can go ahead and pull the historical dividend rate from the dividend model, from the cash flow statement. So this used to be the historical dividend model. Okay. Then the historical FCF perpetuity growth rate has been just that. So I feel like I made a mistake here. I'll tell you a reason. The mistake being we are going to replace all of these values. So forget about what I have been doing so far. So what we should do is not that, but go here to the perpetuity model. So this is the first thing we're going to do. We're going to put down the assumptions here. We're going to work with these assumptions too, but start from the assumptions here. Okay. Then do the averages in this place. So our assumptions, so we go here. Let me start from here. Okay, so assumptions, we have some historical value. So I'm gonna go ahead and unmerge three of these things and call it historical average. And if you were to merge this data, you merge it, it is already merged for me. And these are forecasts. Now forecasts are going to be not always the average of the historical data. Right now let's just do the historical averages. Okay. So historical averages is 2013, not the average, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and so on. Okay. Now for the historical average portion, we just pull the data from whatever it was there in the beginning. Yeah. So we already have these when we forecasted the income statement, balance sheet, etc. So for historical average, I'll just go here and do Control up and go to go here. So NA and so on, and I can drag it down all the way to effective tax rate because that pertains to income statement. For the other guys, days sales outstanding and so on, I go to the balance sheet and I'll click here, and I can copy it across until 15 and copy it down until DNA to sales ratio, right? Then for the dividends, I'm gonna go and for the dividends, I'm gonna go and copy stuff from the cash flow statement, this value. So all I'm doing is copying historical value. Then we have FCF perpetuity growth rate. I know I have double growth, don't need double growth. Then let's add another column for the discount rate. Remember, we have lots of discount rates. Our weighted average cost of capital, discount rate, or let me also call it weighted average cost of capital. Okay. So for these guys, the historical value are FCF perpetuity growth rate. The historical values are here. This one, which is non-applicable, let's call it NA. So for free cash flow growth here, NA, and so on. Okay. So what you want to do, the first thing is make these guys prettier. Sales growth, SG&A, other operating expenses, these things, other income is a percentage of sales, effective tax rate, all of these things are percentages, so just convert it to percentage. Debt sales outstanding is a number, so that's fine. This is fine. Other current asset is also percentage, so I'm going to change that to percent. Current liability, capex, dividend, all of these are percentages. Okay, and perpetuity growth rate is also percentage, and so on. Alright, so once we have made everything look nicer, I'm going to put a line over here to separate out historical average with the forecast. Okay, now the forecast variable is not going to be an average of these things. Okay, so forecast variable will depend on the scenario and so on. That is the important part. So the forecast variable is going to depend on our scenario. That's the point of this whole thing. Okay, now let's go back. And put in the driver assumptions. Now let's go back and put all of these things here. So now historical average. So I kind of think through it when I started this thing, because the historical average, I cannot pick these values from our income statement initially, because those values are going to change. So what I'm going to do is I take the average from the DCF FCF perp model right here. Okay, so I have the exact same columns like these, excluding discount rate. So I have exact column like these, taking averages, and I just dragged it down, and everything will be averaged up, and I can hit this percentage for most of these guys, and for some of these guys I'm gonna change it back to numbers, because debt sales outstanding, payable outstanding, and these guys should be general format, not numbers. Okay, All right, so these are our historical average if you want to use historical average as our driver. Now we have other options too, right? Instead of using the historical average, let's use analyst forecast. Okay, so when you do the actual real thing, you might want to go back and find out how financial analysts have been forecasting this company's sales, cost of goods sold, etc., etc., or want to look at the industry averages of these things, and some of which we have calculated. But to simplify things, if you want, you can go to Yahoo Finance's website like that and do that. However, to simplify those things and not to overburden you with this homework, what we're going to assume is analyst forecast is just rounded number of historical average. Okay, this is a big assumption. I mean, this is not really an assumption, but this is kind of a placeholder. But remember, when you do the actual thing in your job, you'll find out analyst forecast. All right, so sales growth, for example, just round it down. Okay, again, we are practicing and learning mechanisms. Some of these things we are just going to make up, right? So round up to a number of digits, up to 100 decimal points. Oh, sorry, 10 decimal points. So up to how many digits do we want to round? I want the 5.08% to be 5%. So what do I have to do? 1000 decimal points? That is interesting. How many numbers do I round up to? Round to 2 decimal. Oh, I was thinking about the places. So round up to 2 decimal points and makes it, this becomes 5%. Okay, cost of goods sold, round up to 2 decimal points and have that at a 34%. Sorry, let's not do that for cost of goods sold, SG&A, and other SG&A. Let's not do that for cost of goods sold, SG&A, and for at least those two things. Okay, because we have industry averages for that. We have industry average for capex and sales, so let's not do that. Let's not do the rounding thing for these guys. All right, let's put the industry average for these guys. Let's continue the other one. So other operating expense as a percentage of sales, just round it to 2 decimal points, and it's going to be 0, but that's okay. You know, this is a very small number, it doesn't have to be anything. Other income, effective tax rates, and so on, let's round it to 2 decimal points whenever it makes sense. So for example, for the days sales outstanding, if you round it to 2 decimal points, it's still going to be 15.05, so you have to round it to 4 decimal points. You have to round it to 0 decimal points, 0 decimal points, so that you get 15.00. And so for like whole numbers, you want to round it, so this got rounded up and became 5%. For this one, to days payable outstanding, round it down to 0 decimal points and change it to general format. Okay, and so on. These are not big deals, but you know, maybe something more you learn. Then you round it to 2 decimal points. The dividend rate also round it to 2 decimal points, and that becomes negative 16%. The perpetuity growth rate, do the same thing, round it to 2 decimal points. And becomes negative 5%. Let me go back and see why this is negative. Right, so this perpetuity growth rate, instead of I took the average of B to D only, but free cash flow growth rate historical average is in fact right here, everything from here to here is the average. So perpetuity, free cash flow perpetuity growth rate is like that, so 3.45% or 3% rounded up. Okay, so what about these yellow things? Remember, we have already figured out the industry averages of these guys, so we are just going to use the industry averages whenever we can. So cost of goods sold to sales ratio of a business like McDonald's is over here. Industry average is not there, but when we did the comparable firms, and we highlighted for large companies such as McDonald's 589, this is the industry definition through 2 digits IC code. This is our cost of goods sold to ratio. For SG&A, again we go back to the pivot table, SG&A to sales ratio. SG&A to sales ratio is supposed to be 10.6%. And capex and D&A, we go back to the pivot table. And this is 6.7% is our capex, industry average. And D&A, we go back to D&A. In the second to the last column is D&A. D&A is presented as a negative number, so we put a negative in front of it and find that. Okay, so analyst forecast is done. Analyst forecast is just the rounded up and down, so that you have to round up around 2 or 4 decimal points, sorry, up to 2 or 0 decimal points, so that you see a huge number. So you see a whole number. So if it is something like 15.01 or 15.05, you round it down, round it to 0 decimal points. If it is like 5.08%, in fraction it's 0.0508. That's why you go to 2 decimal points and so on. Okay, simple things like that. So make sure if it converted to 0 decimal points, this becomes 0. Right? You don't want that. You want it to be 5%. Okay, and let's create some more scenarios. So this was historical average, this is analyst forecast, and let's create something like optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic scenarios. So let's just assume simple stuff. So optimistic scenario will be like 1% or 1 point higher, depending on whether it's a percentage or a full number. 1% or 1 point higher for good things, and 1% or 1 point lower for bad things. So for example, higher sales growth is good for a free cash flow, so it's going to be an optimistic scenario. It is going to be 1% higher than analyst forecast. Okay, cost of goods sold to sales ratio is a bad thing for free cash flow. That's why subtract 1% from that. Same with the SG&A to sales ratio. You want this is a bad thing for free cash flow. That's why you subtract 1% from analyst forecast or industry average. Okay, this is both analyst forecast and industry average. Other operating expense as a percentage of sales is a bad thing for free cash flow, So in optimistic scenario, subtract 1% from it, and you see you get a negative other operating income or expense, but let's leave it like that. It seems unrealistic, but it does not matter. We're just learning things again. Then other income as a percentage of sales is a good thing. So let's increase it by 1%. Increase it by 1% and so on. In fact, let me just drag it down, drag it all the way down. Okay, drag it all the way down and make some changes here and there. So effective tax rate is a bad thing. Subtract 1%. Days sales outstanding is a bad thing. So you subtract 1, not 1%, because it's a full number, so it has to be 14. Same here. Days inventory held is a bad thing. You want to turn over your inventory as much as possible, so days inventory held is a bad thing, so subtract 1%. Days payable outstanding, you want to defer your payment to your suppliers as much as possible, that's why you subtract 1 from here. Okay, sorry, subtract 1 from that. Days inventory held, subtract 1 from that. Other current asset as a percentage of sales. Now that is a bad thing for free cash flow, because that is a part of the net working capital, positive side. So you want to subtract 1%. Even if it sounds like asset, current asset is bad for free cash flow, increase in current asset, so you subtract 1%. Days payable outstanding is a good thing, because you want to defer payment to your suppliers as much as possible, so you subtract 1 and change the format like that, 20 days. 7%. Other current liability is a good thing for free cash flow, so you add 1. Purchase of intangibles is a bad thing, so you subtract 1%. Capex to sales ratio, again, fewer capex is better for free cash flow if you can maintain your sales, so you subtract 1. D&A to sales, I don't know whether it's good or bad. So depreciation, amortization, why does that matter? That matters for free cash flow. That matters because D&A, everything else remaining the same, D&A kind of saves your cash flow, so it gets added back. So let's increase it. Now this is kind of tricky. Let's increase it by subtracting 1%. Right, the higher the better. The higher negative since gets subtracted, it gets added back in the free cash flow model. Let's do that. A dividend to sales, dividends does not really matter for free cash flow to the firm, because dividend is a payment to the shareholders. But for the sake of argument, just let's change it to, in optimistic scenario, let's say we have to pay less dividends, so do +1, so that the dividend paid, it gets changed to 15%. And finally, free cash flow perpetuity growth rate, let's add 1% to it and make it 4%. So free cash flow growth rate is obviously good for the firm value. Okay, all right, let's now create two more things called realistic and pessimistic. Okay, so realistic scenario, let's assume, is the same thing as analyst forecast. Okay, so we expect realistic analyst forecast to be the same as a realistic scenario. So realistic analyst scenario as realistic as possible, the most likely to happen, the industry average or analyst forecast. You can have different things as from that, but to make life simple, let's say the realistic scenario is the same thing as analyst forecast. Then now I have to change this format, sorry. Change these formats, change that format, and so on. Okay, now pessimistic one, I'm trying to see how big is the file. Alright, almost half a gigabyte, so I have to stop at some point soon. So pessimistic one, so just like optimistic one was 1% above if it is a good thing, 1% below if it is a bad thing. Let's do that opposite. So pessimistic one will be, so sales growth is a good thing for free cash flow. So let's say in the pessimistic scenario it is 1% less. Okay, and let me just continue that and drag it all the way down, and we're gonna make some changes. Cost of goods sold to sales ratio is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1%. SG&A, bad thing, same thing, add 1%. Add 1%. Then other operating expense is a good thing, so add 1%. Other operating expense is a bad thing, so add 1%. Other income is a good thing, so subtract 1%. Effective tax rate is a bad thing, so add 1%. Days sales outstanding. Days sales outstanding is a bad thing, so add 1, not 1%. Add 1. Days inventory held, same, so add 1. So you're extending more credits, which is bad for, and you're turning your inventory slower, which is a bad thing. Other current assets. A current asset is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1%. Days payable outstanding is a good thing, so let's subtract 1. Okay, this will give you an opportunity to think about why this is good or bad. Okay, so anything that increases the need of net working capital is bad. Anything that decreases the need for net working capital is good, and you can figure out what increases or decreases net working capital needs from here. Other current liabilities is a bad thing, so subtract 1%. Purchase of intangible is a bad thing, so add 1%. Capex as a percentage of sales is a bad thing for free cash flow, so let's add 1. DNA as a percentage of sales, add not 1, add 1%. DNA as a percentage of sales is a good thing, everything else remaining the same, so subtract 1%. Subtract 1%, but we want to make it smaller in absolute sense, so you're gonna add 1%. Dividend as a percentage of sales, so we want to pay as less dividend as possible ideally, so we want to make in pessimistic scenario we want to make it larger, so minus 1%. FCF, perpetuity growth rate, we want it as large as possible in good situations, so in pessimistic situation we subtract 1%. Okay, I have to fix this percentage stuff. Okay, so that would be when we have already, now we have all the possible scenarios that we can plug in to our big model right here, after doing a few things, and I'll show you what we need to do more in the next video. Okay, so let me exit out of this one and save it as a part 1.